let's get to it. Now, I've already mentioned a couple. I've talked about the Vedas, at least in passing. I've quoted the Rig Veda. I've talked about the Upanishads. I've talked about the big texts. Well, let's go into what the texts are. Just like when we were talking about the Torah and the Talmud and the Tanakh and the Mishnah and the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Quran and the Hadith. What do we have here? Basically, we can divide the texts of Hinduism into two subdivisions. The first subdivision is Shruti, which means that we hear it. We're hearing it now. Hearing what? Really, the words of the divine. So these are really the old texts, which have no author. That is, they have no purported author. Who's the author? In a sense, the universe, Brahman. These are not the words of human beings. The other texts that we'll get to are. These are not the words of human beings. These are the words of Brahman. These are the most holy. They are considered the most authoritative. Well, what are they? Well, here we go. Now, there are different ways to divide these texts. Basically, for the Vedas, we have 4 Vedas. So we can look at as here are the 4 Vedas. And I'm going from basically the earliest one, the Rig Veda, to the most recent. So what's in there? Well, if you look at the Rig Veda, it's mainly those old hymns. Or like the one about, what was it like for when creation activated and started breathing? Was it conscious? That's what you see in the Rig Veda. These hymns about the gods, specifically to specific gods and nature itself. That's one Veda. The next Veda is the Yajurveda, which are these mantras to perform in rituals. What are mantras? Well, they're things that you say and things that you kind of sing in a melodic voice, not merely speaking like I am now, but saying in that kind of, there's a rhythm to the voice and a melody that's different from just your normal speaking for specific rituals. Bhakti, we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to practice. So specific ritual mantras. Then there's the Samaveda. What are these? These are really, now it says melodies and chants. Now you might be thinking, well, how is that any different from mantras? And how is that any different from hymns? Hymns are, remember, specifically songs to gods. Mantras are the things that we say in ritual. Okay, things, it almost sounds like we're kind of muttering it to ourselves to some degree. When it says melodies and chants, really, music. All kinds of music. In the Samavedas, there's really, like, here's how to make these kinds of harmonies. In many ways, it's kind of a musical instruction manual. Here's how to make this kind of music. Here's the different kinds of harmonies that there are. Have these people sing these notes and these people sing these notes. All kinds of music. Both the lyrics and how to do the sounds, too. That's different, definitely, from the first two. Notice how much lyrical stuff is here in these Vedas. And then finally, the Athara Veda, which has, some people would say this is how, like, it contains spells. Some people say, really, daily rituals, here's how you do this, what we consider mundane tasks, and also medicine. Like, there's stuff in there about, if you have some kind of injury, here's how to treat this particular injury. So all kinds of practical advice. Here's how to wash your body properly. All kinds of instruction. So those are the 4 Vedas. From the Rig Veda being the most ancient to the Athara Veda. And we go from, well, who are these stuff for? Really, these are for the Brahmins. These are for priests. These are for priests. These are for priests. These are for everyone. So the priest needs to know the hymns. The priest needs to know the mantras for the rituals. The priest needs to know how we should sing. But there's a sense in which that one can be for everybody too. When we get together, what songs are we going to sing there? And then the last one, that's not just for priests. That's for everyone. How I ought to do this. How I ought to compose myself. I have an injury. I don't necessarily need to go to a priest for it. How do I treat it myself? That stuff's in there. So this is one way we can talk about it. Here's the 4. Now this is, like I said, this is different from the Abrahamic set of texts. But there's another way we can go at it as well. Because what we see as the Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, the Athara Veda, it's not like the Rig Veda was written at one time and then it was done. It was written in installments over time. And so much like if we do a cross-section of a tree, we can say, all right, we can watch it develop. Some parts are older than other parts. We can look in there and see what are the oldest parts and what are the youngest parts. Yeah, we can actually do this with other books too. Like in the book of Genesis, it looks, for example, like Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 were written at different times by different people. Because in Genesis 1, for example, it talks about Elohim, the creator God who made everything. Right? Here he created light. He doing all the big cosmic stuff. Then you get into Genesis 2, here's doesn't say Elohim anymore. Now it says Hashem making Adam and Eve in the garden. It's really much more personal and intimate. And the tone even seems different. So people say these were written at different times, probably by different people, and they were compiled together later, probably after the exile. Be that as it may, we can look at other texts and say, this part was written here. New Testament, we can do this too. When I said earlier, these things were probably written by Paul then, these things were probably written by Paul this other time. Some parts, even with the Gospels, we can say earlier parts, like the Sermon on the Mount, is probably the earliest part of Matthew and Luke. They're sharing some kind of source there. Well, similarly, we can say some parts of these are older than others. So what are those parts? So these four subdivisions that I have here really can apply to any of these four. So while we can divide it as the Vedas, here's the four different Vedas and their topics, we can also look at it this way. What are the oldest parts? First of all, we've got the Samhitas. What's in the Samhitas? Those are the earliest songs. That's what we see in early Vedic religion, just songs.
So it's just the top line.
Yeah, so really here, we've got kind of a subject differences. Okay. Like here, organized by topic. Okay. And here we've got it organized probably by development. The thing that gets a little confusing is, at least as whole topics, this is also kind of the order in which they came in terms of time too. So just know the two divisions, and I'm definitely not putting timestamps on these. So the Samhitas, those are just the simplest early stuff of the Vedas. Then later, the second wave of stuff that got inserted in those Vedas were the Brahmanam. What are those? Those are the priestly instructions. Hey priests, here's what you're supposed to do. Here's how to light the fire for Agni. The Samhitas are about the song lyrics, how to sing to Agni, the god of fire, or Indra, pick your god. The Brahmanam are how to perform various tasks for the gods. Then later, the Aranyaka. Now these are really the philosophical aspects of Hinduism. There are so if the first set of stuff, the Samhita says, all right, Agni, god of fire. And then the Brahmanam says, here's how to perform rituals for Agni. The Aranyaka will go into detail about, well, here's what Agni is, and here's what the god of fire represents, and here's how we understand why we like the rituals and this kind of way. It goes into all this explanatory detail about why we do what we do, about the previous stuff. Now remember, if you just pick up a Veda, all this stuff is mixed in kind of a random order. But these are the four things that you'll see in there. And then finally, Upanishad. So here we see even more stuff on how to do meditation, how to do philosophy, and it says ontology. That's a word that talks about what is. So this doesn't just go into details about here's why we're doing what we're doing. It says, oh, by the way, here's how we describe all of reality. So this is stuff that goes into huge, big detail.
So what's ontology?
That's the study of being. So so that's a word for means being. So ontology is like what is and what is not. That's what ontology is, what is and what is not. So sometimes that can be philosophically confusing. Like, is there such a thing as nothing? Is an ontological question. Like, does nothing exist? And I'm thinking about it right now. Well, then you're thinking of something that's not nothing. That's confusing, Professor. Well, exactly, that ontology is. So ontology would be things like, well, does God exist? That's an ontological question. So is the question, do gremlins exist? Like, the question, does X exist, is ontology. What is and what is not. So it says that, yeah, gods exist. Brahman exists. And it goes into great detail about that. That's what the Upanishads are. But so the Upanishads are these parts, these later parts, inside the Vedas that are about this deeper stuff. It's not merely the song lyrics. It's about explication and explanation. What is and what is not. So I've got a copy of the principal Upanishads here. I'm going to read from a little bit here in a moment. So where did the Upanishads come from? So sometimes you might think, Well, just like the Jews had the Torah and then the Talmud came later. No, the Upanishads are in the Vedas. But the later parts of the Vedas that do this stuff. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a reading from one. Let's take a look at an Aranyaka from the Vedas. Remember I said the Aranyaka, that's the stuff that explains the rituals. So when we're talking about Atman, this is from the Aranyaka. And when I was talking about this last time about how, well, what's so great about being a human being? Because we're conscious. Everything is Atman as Brahman. Everything is Atman. Table is Atman. This is part of the universe. It's Brahman too. And it's Atman. Does it know it's Atman? No, this is a lesser form of being. I, on the other hand, and you, in virtue of being a human, you are an elevated form of Atman in that you are self-conscious. You can know that you're Atman and Brahman. The table can't do that. Maybe one day it will. Years from now, and this table is annihilated, but the Atman persists and is reconstituted as something else, maybe it will be conscious. Right now it's not. So this is about that. What do we know about Atman? So this is in the Aranyaka. But only in human beings is the Atman obvious. That is, we know we're Atman. For they are equipped with cognition. We have reason, the ability to think. They speak what they have understood. We can talk about it. Even other animals can understand some things. The rat can get to the cheese at the end of the maze, but the rat can't tell you, here's how I got to the cheese at the end of the maze. They see what they have recognized and know what will exist tomorrow. We can make predictions. Even just scientific predictions. I don't mean like psychic predictions. They know of this world and of the other. Through that which is mortal, they strive for immortality. They are equipped with all this. Such a human being is an ocean. He partakes of everything in the world, and still his thoughts go beyond it. And even if he were to partake of the other world, his thoughts would also go beyond it. What do we have? This. We have the ability to reason and think. We can think about other worlds, even the other brilliant animals that are smart. Some animals are, in some ways, are smarter than human beings, right? They can't do this. They can't contemplate in this way. But surely animals can think. Your dog can think. But they can't think like this. And that's what makes this form of Atman so unique. And how do we learn that? From the texts. From the Aranyaka. Here it is telling us about it. These are, if you look back at the Rig Veda that's earlier in this way, that's not this. What was the universe like? This is telling you what it's like. You are Atman. And there it is. Okay, and then also, we've got these other texts that are called Shmrti. That means remembered. Not heard, like we hear it now. And all that means is like, so the Shruti heard because they mean something now. They're authoritative now. These, on the other hand, Smrti, they're remembered because it's kind of like, oh yeah, they're important, but they're not as important. But they're not scripture in the same sense. So first we got the Vedanga. What are Vedanga? Basically works of everyday knowledge. There's a lot of stuff on grammar. Stuff that we might equivalent with mathematics and science. The quadrivium and the trivium in the Latin world, that's stuff like geometry, grammar, music, poetry, etymology, all that stuff's in there. Like, here's the things you need to know about language. A lot of it seems like your basic school curriculum. But these are things that are important to know. This is how the world works. This is how language works. It's something everybody should know. Again, not scripture in the same sense. But you don't really see that too much in other religious textual traditions. This is basically kind of like the sciences, the various kinds of knowledge that we have that we should study. Then we have the Itihasa. These are the big epics. That big history, the Puranas that I was talking about last time. So that's going to have like the really old texts that are stories. The great myths. Like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Usually, stories about avatars. What are avatars? Those are manifestations of the gods, where they come down and they incarnate into human form. And they might have more than one incarnation. That's what an avatar is. It's a particular enfleshment. So in Christianity, for example, who is incarnate? The second person of the Trinity. And the incarnate form there is Jesus Christ. But that's it. There are not other incarnations. In Hinduism, Vishnu, for example, has multiple incarnations, where he will be incarnate and be an avatar that is him, but he does it more than once. And it's still Vishnu the whole time, each time, but he's a different person. For example, there's one time where the Kshatriya class becomes violent and starts, stealing land from the peasants. But Vishnu, one of Vishnu's avatars, comes down as with someone with an axe and goes down slaying, and this is rare for Hinduism for there to be a story with such violence in it, slays all the unjust Kshatriyas, the warriors, so as to help the peasants. But that's the god Vishnu in a human form. In the Ramayana, the prince Rama is an avatar of Vishnu on a quest. I've mentioned this one before. In the Mahabharata, Krishna, that appears to Arjuna. Krishna is in charge of Arjuna's horses, but it's actually the god Vishnu in a human form. Now, usually in depictions, Vishnu's avatars are always illustrated with blue skin to let you know, hey, that's actually Vishnu. We've got these big texts, the Itihasa, and then we have Shastra. You notice it says precepts there. Only here do we get here's things you should do. That's what I mean by precepts. Here's things you should do. You should, for example, bathe. Take care of yourself. Dress in a certain way. All those kinds of precepts, we don't really see that until here. That's what's not by precept. Things you should do. Is that in the Vedas? Generally, do your dharma. Well, is there a list where it says, unlike, say, halakha. Halakha, the Sharia goes into great detail about here's how you do this, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do this. You don't have that in Hinduism in the same way. There's not a specific list of here's for specific rituals, surely. But in terms of your daily life stuff, here are some suggestions. But look how far, this is not in the Shruti. This is here on the list of recommended stuff, and it's far down. And then the sutras. Sutras are aphorisms. So these are also little bits of advice that almost read like tweets. Sometimes later sutras become like these treatises, big books on a subject, but usually divided into these little statements one at a time, and little things to meditate on. So what's the theme of all these texts? Well, I'm going to take a look at a couple here. So let me start by looking, now this is part of the Shruti. We'll look at the Upanishad. This is from the Katha Upanishad. And what happens in the Katha Upanishad is there is this young person, Nachiketa. Nachiketa is a child, and his dad comes home and says, I'm going to literally give you to the god of death. Bye. And so then Nachiketa ends up being literally in the presence of the god or lord of death. And while there, Nachiketa says, well, I'm here now. Oh, god of death, what can you teach me about the universe? I'm here. Yeah, you're the god of death, and that's kind of intimidating, but tell me. What do you know? What can you teach me? You're a god, I respect you. And the god of death is like, all right, you're here. Let's do this. So Nachiketa says this, teach me, O king, I beseech thee. Whatever thou knowest to be beyond right and wrong, beyond cause and effect, beyond past, present, and future. Tell me what you know. And I'm just going to read this little section here where the god of death summarizes what this life, what Hinduism is all about. And he spends a lot of time talking about that sacred syllable, Om. So listen to what he says. Some of this I'm going to translate a little bit differently for our purposes off the cuff, so we can keep things consistent. So listen what the god of death says to Nachiketa. Of that goal which all the Vedas declare, which is implicit in all penances, and in pursuit of which men lead lives of continence in service of that, I will briefly speak. So sure, Nachiketa, I'll answer your question. You want to know? What's life about? What else can I teach you? What's the most important stuff I can teach you? It is Om. Using a word. One Om. That sacred syllable. That's it. That's my one-word answer. Now he goes on to explain it, thankfully. This syllable, Om, is Brahman. This syllable is indeed supreme. He who knows it obtains his desire. It is the strongest support. It is the highest symbol. He who knows it is reverenced as a knower of Brahman. Atman. The English text here says the self, but that's Atman, I know in Sanskrit. Atman, whose symbol is Om, is the omniscient Lord. He is not born, he does not die, he is neither cause nor effect. The ancient one, Brahman, is unborn, imperishable, eternal. Though the body be destroyed, he is not killed. If the slayer thinks that he slays, if the slain thinks that he is slain, neither of them knows the truth. The self slays not. The Atman does not kill, nor is he slain. In reality. That is, yeah, do our bodies die? Sure. Do we really die? Does the soul die? No. We don't die. And if you think that, you're wrong. Smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, this Atman forever dwells within the hearts of all. When a man is free from desire, his mind and senses purified, he beholds the glory of the self and is without sorrow. Though seated, he travels far. Though at rest, he moves all things. Who but the purest of the pure can realize this effulgent being that is just exceedingly glowing with light and power? Who is joy and who is beyond joy? Formless is he, though inhabiting form. In the midst of the fleeting, he abides forever, all-pervading like Vishnu. And supreme is the Atman. The wise man, knowing him in his true nature, transcends all grief. Atman is not known through the study of the scriptures, nor through subtlety of the intellect, nor through much learning, but by him who longs for him he is known. Verily unto him does the Atman reveal his true being. By learning, a man cannot know him. If he desist not from evil, if he control not his senses, if he quiet not his mind, and practice not meditation, jnana. To him, Brahmins and Kshatriyas are but food, and death itself is a condiment. So does death matter? Not really. And what's the thing to know? Like, study the scriptures, of which this is a scripture, by the way, here. This is part of the Upanishads. This is in the Vedas. What are we supposed to know? Atman. And that Atman is what? Atman is Brahman. You are the universe, and the universe is you. And this whole thing, I'm doing this right now, little stuff I'm focusing on. It's just me in my own little kingdom. But you're wrong. Everything's connected. And now, of all the advice, in front of the god of death, Nachiketa asks, what can you tell me? Om. That's what it means. So it looks like, yeah, it's just one syllable up there. But what does it all mean? It means everything that the god of death just said. Now that's out of the Shruti. That comes out of the revealed texts. Now I want to read a passage out of the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of those we remember texts. This is out of that big epic story, but it's still going to involve some of that Om. What we just read was out of an Upanishad. But what I'm going to look at now is out of the Smriti, from the Bhagavad Gita. Well, the Bhagavad Gita itself, a little episode from this big book, the Mahabharata, part of the Itihasa. So what's going on in the Bhagavad Gita? Here, I said before, remember, another theme, at least in terms of life, what to know, Atman is Brahman. Okay, that's something we should know intellectually. But what are we supposed to do with most of our lives? Dharma. Do your duty. Those things are connected. Dharma is the way we most articulate ourselves as Atman and Brahman. But what happens in the Bhagavad Gita? And the Mahabharata is about this giant war that goes on for years and years and years and years. There's an episode in there, the Bhagavad Gita, where I said before, Arjuna is this prince, part of a large family of which a lot of the Mahabharata focuses on. And he just thinks he's done fighting. Even though he's a Kshatriya, even though he's a warrior, I'm done. One of the avatars of Vishnu shows up. In this case, it's Krishna saying, "Hey, let's get back to work. Let's go fight." And, of course, and it's also the person who's in charge of driving his chariots. This particular avatar is like the head of the Prince Arjuna's horses, but it's actually the Lord Vishnu. So Vishnu says this here. And this is one of the many things. So really, the whole thing is Arjuna and Krishna having a back and forth. Lord Krishna says this to Arjuna. He says many things, but this is the thing I want to focus on. Arjuna, you grieve for this is in the middle of a battle. You grieve for those beyond grief. and you speak words of insight, but learned men do not grieve, for the dead or the living. Never have I not existed, nor you, nor these kings, and never in the future shall we cease to exist. Just as the embodied self enters childhood, youth, and old age, so does it enter another body. And this does not confound a steadfast man. Contacts with matter make us feel heat and cold, pleasure and pain. Arjuna, you must learn to endure fleeting things. They come and go. When these cannot torment a man, when suffering and joy are equal for him, and he has courage, he is fit for immortality. Nothing of non-being comes to be, nor does being cease to exist. The boundary between these two is seen by men who see reality. Indestructible is the presence that pervades all this. Is that word in English there, pervading. Remember, he's the God of pervading, that is keeping around. No one can destroy this unchanging reality. Our bodies are known to end, but the embodied self is enduring, the Atman, indestructible and immeasurable. Therefore, Arjuna, fight the battle. He who thinks this self a killer, and he who thinks it killed, both fail to understand. It does not kill nor is killed. It is not born. It does not die. Having been, it will never not be. Unborn, enduring, constant, and primordial. It is not killed when the body is killed. Arjuna, when a man knows the self to be indestructible, enduring, unborn, unchanging, how does he kill or cause anyone to kill? As a man discards worn-out clothes to put on new and different ones, so the embodied self discards its worn-out bodies to take on other new ones. Weapons do not cut it. Fire does not burn it. Waters do not wet it. Wind does not wither it. It cannot be cut or burned. It cannot be wet or withered. It is enduring, all-pervasive, fixed, immovable, and timeless. It is called unmanifest, inconceivable, and immutable. Since you know that to be so, you should not grieve. If you think of its birth and death as ever recurring, then too great warrior, you have no cause to grieve. Death is certain for anyone born, and birth is certain for anyone dead. Since the cycle is inevitable, you have no cause to grieve. Creatures are unmanifest in origin, manifest in the midst of life, and unmanifest again in death. Since this is so, why do you lament? He's asking, why are you sad? Why do you not want to fight? Well, I don't want to kill anybody. Well, yeah, and non-violence is good, right? But here, you're not really killing anyone permanently in this battle, which the battle here is important. Rarely someone sees it, rarely another speaks it, rarely anyone hears it. Even hearing it, no one really knows it. The self-embodied in the body of every being is indestructible. You have no cause to grieve for all these creatures. Arjuna, look to your own dharma. Do not tremble before it. Nothing is better for a warrior than a battle of sacred duty. The doors of heaven open for warriors who rejoice to have a battle like this, thrust on them by chance. If you fail to wage this war, if you fail to do your dharma of sacred duty, you will abandon your own duty and fame only to gain evil. People will tell of your undying shame, and for a man of honor, shame is worse than death. The great chariot warriors will think you deserted in fear of battle. You will be despised by those who held you in esteem. Your enemies will slander you, scorning your kill. In so many unspeakable ways, could any suffering be worse? If you are killed, you will win heaven. If you triumph, you enjoy the earth. Therefore, Arjuna, stand up and resolve to fight the battle. This goes on and on. So what are the themes there? So Arjuna goes, Arjuna, I don't want to fight anymore. And Vishnu, in this case in the form of Krishna, goes out of his way again and again. Hey, no. Yes, this violence is terrible. But is anything here really ultimately destroyed? No. So yes, war here. Now this is an ancient piece here too. So yes, there is the notion of nonviolence. That's important. But here in the battles that must be fought, yes, there's a terrible cost. But Krishna is reminding Arjuna here, yes, there is a terrible cost. But nothing is ultimately really ever totally destroyed. everything's going to make a comeback. I'm struck especially by the line, yes, everyone born is going to die, but everyone who dies is going to be born. It's not over. But also, Krishna in the text keeps stressing, yeah, all that stuff's true too, but also, really here, it's all Atman and Brahman, but also, most importantly here, do your dharma. You are a kshatriya, you are a warrior. You must fight. If you don't do this, yeah, sure, there's all this bad stuff that people will say about you. You didn't do your duty, he was a coward, all that kind of stuff people will say, surely. But also, you end up, he says, we talk about, dying and then coming back. This is worse than death, to not perform your duty. So whether it be the Shruti texts, the ones that are heard, like the Vedas and the Upanishads, what do they stress? Atman is Brahman, Brahman is Atman, do your dharma. Or the Shmurti texts, the ones that are remembered, what do they stress? Atman is Brahman, Brahman is Atman, do your dharma. They both stress the same thing. This, however, the last one that I read, is this scripture? After a fashion. It's not as important as the Vedas or the Upanishads, but what's it doing? Reiterating the teachings of the Vedas and the Upanishads. It's in there. There's not really, this is a story now, so there's new content to it, but in terms of the substance, it's the same. The same beliefs here, the same principles. That brings us to our next node, the notion of ritual, of which this is also quite different from the Abrahamic religions in the way that the rest of the stuff is going to work out. But of course it is. So we're going to see stuff with ritual here and experts and the notion of community all be quite distinct from what we've seen in the Abrahamic faiths, where the Abrahamic faiths really stress an external community. The synagogue as the people, the church as the people, the ummah as the people. You don't really have that in Hinduism in the same way. There's not really a Hindu equivalent of a church or an ummah or a synagogue. There's buildings, surely, and places where people congregate. But there's not really a sense, there's just the Hindus. There's just Hinduism and its various practices. So what do we have in terms of ritual? And here's a god we haven't seen yet. That's not Brahma. That's not Shiva. That's not Vishnu. The elephant god. Anybody know? That's Ganesha. Or sometimes just Ganesh, which there's a lot of Ganesha worship today, especially. But who is Ganesha ultimately? Brahman. Because everything is. It's just not a particular manifestation of Brahman. And you see here people worshiping Ganesha. There's some smaller Ganeshas down there. So, well, how does that work? What do we do here in this worship? So, here's the first thing here. A lot of different rituals. And like I said here, what makes Hinduism different too is they're far less outward. Now, when I say outward here, I mean stuff like this. Where might Jews go on the Shabbat, on the Sabbath? To the synagogue. Out together. Where might Christians go? Probably on Sunday. There's a church, right? Muslims might go to the local ummah, like the Islamic Community Center. They might get together and they might do stuff together. Most of Hindu worship happens in the home. There are temples. I'll talk about them in a little bit. There are temples where people come together, especially at holy sites. And there are a lot of holy sites. But really, most of the focus is on doing these rituals in one's own household, of which there might be some kind of altar in the house. So, what are some of the kinds of rituals that we have? We have puja. That's the offering of various kinds of substances to the divine, in terms of it like an offering. Usually from that list of things you see up there, or all of them. Light, so lighting a candle. flowers, water, or food, or all of the above. That's what we saw happening here with Ganesha earlier. Then we've got Samskara. Samskara is probably the most well-known types of rituals today in Hinduism. These are the celebration of various life stages. So remember, the entire universe is cyclical. And so we've probably been through these various life stages before, and we'll be through them again, but we celebrate them as they come. So what kinds of life stages? Well, really, they're contingent on all kinds of things. Your station in life, your gender, things like that. And here's what I mean by that. Like, there's a particular kind of celebration for a woman becoming pregnant. That's a life stage. This is something, yeah, it happens. It happens to many people, but it can't happen to everyone. And there's a celebration of the naming of a baby. That's only going to happen here in this life at least one time. And there's a particular celebration of a baby taking its first solid food for the first time. All these stages, and probably the biggest one is marriage, a wedding. An Indian wedding is a big deal. Why? Because it's a union, not just of two individuals, but two families. So that's probably the most important life stage that you could think of is a marriage. Or specifically a wedding, the initiation or inauguration of a marriage. That's true in other faiths too. But here, there's a particular kind of celebration that goes along with it as samskara. It all fits together as part of the cycle. And then also the other kind, and we're going to look at a little bit more stuff on this. There's also bhakti, which is a particular worship of certain gods. So earlier what we saw in the depiction could be puja, giving these various offerings to the divine. But bhakti is we're on a certain team. Okay, I'm on team Vishnu, or I'm on team Shiva. We're going to worship a particular god, and we're on that team. Yeah, we're all part of one greater Hinduism, but really being into this particular deity, of which there are several. And by several, I mean really as many as you can count. But this is a later development. Let's take a look at some of this stuff that illustrates some of the practices of Hinduism. We'll let these play, and then we'll make some comments on them. Questions, comments? Great thoughts. Sure.
So you don't have to worship all three of the divisions?
Nope. No, not at all. Exactly. There's a lot of and even here this notion of bhakti is select the deity of your choice. So there's the big three, like you said, there's the Trimurti, but we also talked about Ganesh, or Agni, or Indra. To some degree, this reminds me of certain forms of Catholicism, like picking your saint. What saint is your saint? So there's a divinity of your choice. Are you going to go with the destroyer, or are you going to go with the pervador? You kind of select that on your own in bhakti, and then you're on that team. And this, I've said this before too. This is part of the issue of what happens when other religions come into India. So when Islam comes into India, they're like, there's only one God, Allah. And they're like, okay, yeah, Allah is Brahman. All right, there's a whole problem there with that. Okay, right, where the Muslims come in. But then later, when the British come into India, we're all going to have a nice Christian India now. Okay, and they're like, Jesus Christ? So he's an avatar of your God, the Trinity. So he's an avatar. Really, he's exactly he's part of Brahman too. Obviously, he's an avatar of Jesus Christ. Maybe he's and it seems like he's about preserving life. It sounds like he might be an avatar of Vishnu, much to the chagrin of the Christians. So often we think of religions as being in opposition to one another. You believe this or else. And in Hinduism, there's so many deities, and they're all representative of the one Brahman that, yeah, you can be a Christian and a Hindu too. It makes perfect sense. What you're saying describes Brahman in a new way. Come on in. Whereas there's kind of more of a sense of ultimacy, especially in Christianity and Islam. But there you see a lot of, really a simplification of a lot of the terms I've talked about in a daily life kind of thing. Here we are, just a practical worship. And the giving of the offering. All right, there. We didn't really talk about that in other religions too, but we saw that especially in early Israelite religion, the slaughtering of animals and so forth. Here you don't have that, but you do have the giving of offering to the divine, to supplicate the divine. So that's a little bit here on that. Let's take a look at this this little short one here on a wedding as well. Notice how ornate this was. This is not a gunshot wedding, right? So this is lavish and certainly in the Garden State, not in India, that's for sure. But also you can see that kind of adaptation and assimilation there, which has always been really a part of Hinduism as well. So we're gonna do some of these things. You see that there, like the bride there was from North India, Punjabi, and the groom was from South India. Like, we do things differently there. Yep, that's okay. Well, and we'll just do that. Like, it's not really like, oh, we can't there. There's differences, and we'll just meld those differences together. Oh, in America, you do things differently. We'll just meld that in. Very adaptable in that regard. But why all such pomp? So much stuff. Now, granted, some American weddings can get big, right? I'm sure. Why is it such a big deal? Because it's one of those moments in life that's so important, and those are the things that are celebrated. Those are the things where the community comes together. And really, it's kind of an everyday, the everyday kinds of events that are big deals. You're getting married, you're having a child, your child's doing this. It's your birthday, those kinds of things. Those things are celebrated. Constantly, the various cycles. Moksha here. So I'm going to say a few things. Now, moksha we've already talked about before. That's that notion of salvation or eventual escape from the cycle of samsara. Why am I bringing it up again? Here, this is part of the various rituals might be contingent, and our ethical practices even might be contingent on our mode of moksha. Now, I mentioned before, how do you achieve moksha? Well, you contemplate, right? In old school Hinduism, early on, you contemplate on the connection between Atman and Brahman, and you might engage in certain forms of yoga in order to exacerbate that realization. Great. But also, as Hinduism develops, you basically get, just like we had earlier, which god you're going to worship. Take your pick. There's also, which method of moksha are you going to select? Take your pick. And that word there, marga, means path. Like we use Buddhism, we'll talk about the arya sanga marga, the eightfold path. We have marga, just path or way. And so we have three paths to moksha. And like I said, this develops later. This is so earlier when I was talking about the simplest early forms in Vedic religion. Now, like modern Hinduism, we can say this. Which path are you on? There's three ways you can go to potentially achieve moksha. One, the karma marga. So what is karma? Right action. So karma marga, that's doing the right stuff and really focusing on dharma. Doing my duty. So like if I'm a warrior, for example, I'm going to be the best warrior I can be. Do my dharma and achieve my karma. That's one route you might go, but that's very different from the bhakti marga. I'm going to devote myself to, say, Vishnu worship. I can achieve moksha that way, but that's not for everyone either. And then finally, there's the jnana marga, knowledge marga, the path of knowledge. What do you do there? It's not the same thing as devotion, it's study. The path to moksha is read the text. So this might be a mystical path. Okay? I'm going to feel the presence of the divine. I'm going to study the Vedas. I'm going to study the Upanishads. I'm going to do things in an intellectual path, and that can achieve moksha. So I might be doing different gods. Maybe I worship Vishnu. Maybe I worship Shiva, Brahma, Agni, so on. Or maybe I'm going to just do my duty to the best of my ability. Really, that's going to be my focus. Or maybe I'm going to study texts, and that's going to be my focus. And so really, here are the various foci of life. And you'll see what's missing here is really a notion of there's no overall sense of community. Like, yeah, here are Hindus together. And we saw it at the wedding, too. But like I said, there's no real sense of church or analog or Ummah or big community coming together. That's not the thing. Really, it's focused on the family. Now, sometimes families can be larger or smaller, but there's a sense in which we do this in our families anyway. And what is the Hindu community? It's the big family anyway. So we don't have to do something separate. There's not the family now and then there's the church. It's already the same thing as it is, because this stuff is already relegated to the home. Okay, that wedding was already, was already taking. It wasn't something merely external. It was already put, it was at the house. Did you notice that? Did you notice the wedding was at the house? It's difficult because everything's at the house. Because our community isn't out there; it's here. So I'll say a few minor things about ritual.